Okay, well, I think we're started. We're getting started, folks. So first off, I wanted to just welcome everybody. I'm really excited about our presentation for today. I know that Miss Kennetra Wood, she will be joining us as well. I think she may have had some technical difficulties, but she's coming back. And she is our Executive Director of Equity and Alternative Programs here in Alexandria City Public Schools. I am the Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Gregory C. Hutchings Jr., and I am looking forward, and we're looking forward to sharing some information with you all in regards to our journey to becoming an anti-racist school division. So I'm hoping that you're in for a treat. We are going to go through some specific details for you all, and then we're going to provide an opportunity to do some Q&A. We've asked for our Chief of School and Community Relations to join us, and that's Miss Julia Burgos for our Q&A, because she spearheaded a lot of our identity project work, and there may be some questions about that as we talk through some of those details throughout our presentation. So we're going to jump right into our presentation with you all this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are, right? It's afternoon for us. It's 12, but I know for some of you it's still morning. And I want to start by talking about who we are in Alexandria City Public Schools, because there is a misnomer out there that, and I apologize, there's noise in the background. My daughter's going to stop. Thank you. I just looked over at her like, my daughters are going to stop. This is what happens when we're doing live, folks. So actually, she's going to stop using that bag. But there is a misnomer out there in regards to Alexandria City Public Schools, because our city is probably one of the richest cities around the country, and it is a place that a lot of people come to visit Old Town and George Washington, and all the shops and the wonderful historical landmarks that we have within our city. But actually, our school division is not a replication of our city as a whole. Our city as a whole is predominantly white and predominantly affluent. However, our schools are predominantly Black and brown and 61% economically disadvantaged, which is a huge misnomer out there, because people assume that our schools mirror our city, and that is absolutely not the case. Majority of our students are actually Hispanic in Alexandria City Public Schools. That is the largest population that we serve in our school division. And our minority groups are actually our Black, our white, and our Asian groups in the city, in Alexandria City Public Schools. So I wanted to put that out there so that you all can just get a general idea of who we are and why this racism or anti-racism journey is so important in Alexandria City Public Schools. As you all know, we are in a dual pandemic, and I keep saying this time and time again to our community. First and foremost, as you all know, we're dealing with this global pandemic due to the coronavirus, and we're still in it, right? I keep telling folks, we are not out of it. I still got my mask right over here. And if we start acting as if everything is back to normal, we are going to do a disservice to this country and to the world. So I'm asking you all, please wear your mask and get vaccinated. I hope that you all already are. But we're in a dual pandemic, dealing with our global pandemic because of our coronavirus, and then also our racial and equity pandemic that we have been dealing with for over 400 years. And that is something that, I'm glad is now resurfaced, and we are just like unapologetically saying, you, America, are going to do something about this by any means necessary. And I'm glad we are at that space. This is similar to how things were back in the 60s when the civil rights movement began. We are now in this new era of civil rights where Black lives do matter, right? And it's unfortunate that we have to say that. And I always tell people, well, why? They say things like, well, why do you have to say Black lives matter? I say, well, you know what? I can't wait until I don't have to say a Black life matters, right? So when we get to that point, then we will stop doing the movement. But as of right now, Black lives matter. And unfortunately, we have to tell America that so that we can move forward. So we are unapologetic here in ACPS, and I can't wait to get into some more details about that. As we started dealing with our Equity for All training in our journey, we wanted to make sure that we developed a strategic plan that will allow us to dismantle racial inequities in Alexandria City Public Schools, and that we have a culture where all kids, regardless of their class, their socioeconomic status, their race, the zip code, or who their parents are or who their parents are not, that every single child receives a high quality education and is engaged in a high quality education, prepared to go out to do whatever they choose in this world. And that is something that we are being extremely bold and courageous about. And I want to say hats off to our school board, who unanimously adopted our strategic plan in June of 2020 during a global pandemic. So in spite of this global pandemic, we continued with our marching orders moving forward to dismantle systemic racism in our schools. So I want to talk a little bit about the importance of starting with your strategic plan, because a lot of times school divisions want to jump to conclusions and they want to jump to, let's get to the solutions, right? And you really need to go through a process in order to ensure that you do a needs assessment, that you identify specifically what your challenges are within your organization, and that you create what your shared mission and vision and core values are going to be, so that you can tackle whatever those inequities are within your organization. For us here in Alexandria, we wanted to make sure that we removed any barriers that we know our Black and Brown students have experienced since the beginning of Alexandria City Public Schools. And we wanted to be bold enough to say that will no longer be acceptable in Alexandria City Public Schools moving forward. And our plan really is the roadmap, not only for our staff, but also for our community, to ensure that we prevail. This gives you a quick snapshot of our strategic planning workbook. And I have to tell you that our strategic planning process was a very rigorous, intense, and intentional process. It took about a year for us from beginning to the adoption of the strategic plan unanimously from the board. But we wanted to ensure that we had multiple, in a very diverse stakeholder representation on our strategic planning team. We were intentional about having students and family members and community members and community leaders and school leaders and teachers and custodians and bus drivers. We had all stakeholder representation on our strategic planning committee. And we were very intentional about that because it was important for us to make sure that people had a seat at the table. Change cannot occur if certain individuals are not seated at that table and able to not only have a voice, but to be a part of that change. So we were very intentional, from gender to race to where people lived to what organizations they were a part of. I mean, we were that intentional with how we selected our strategic planning committee. But this is an example of our strategic planning workbook. And specifically what we wanted to be able to do was paint the picture for not only our strategic planning committee, but also for our community as to why this journey on anti-racism needed to occur. We specifically looked at our academic achievement data, and we didn't just utilize our state data and information. We wanted to make sure that we were looking at some of our local assessments. We were looking at our attendance rates, our graduation rates, our discipline rates, our special education identification rates, just so that we were having multiple data sources as we were developing what our strategic focus areas needed to be. We provide the strategic planning workbook at the beginning of our journey, and we use that as the catalyst for us to make the changes that were necessary for ACPS, or propose the changes that were necessary for ACPS. We have now taken the strategic planning workbook and many components of the strategic planning workbook. It's been adjusted based on our new strategic plan, but now we have made this our annual report document. So the strategic planning workbook has now turned into our annual report document, so that we are monitoring our progress throughout the next 5 years as we embark on our journey to becoming anti-racist. So I'm going to turn things over right now to really get into our journey. So Ms. Wood is going to give us some background as to where we were, where we are, and where we're going.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Hutchings. Alexandria City Public Schools is guided by, as Dr. Hutchings said, our strategic plan 2025, equity for all, and at its heart is racial equity. And we know that a journey represents travel or passages from one place to another, But we also know that a journey can be progress from one stage to another as well. Journeys sometimes you see obstacles, you see setbacks, but through it all, there are lessons to be learned, experiences to be remembered, and perspectives to be valued and understood through new eyes. So, as we think about our journey and where we began with talking about cultural competencies and our culturally responsive teaching. We really wanted to engage our staff in professional learning around cultural competency. But we knew that we had to go further. With the return of our awesome superintendent, Dr. Hutchings, we embarked on our equity and our racial equity specifically, our journey for racial equity. We continue with specific training with our leaders, where we dug really deep into vocabulary and common language and terms that support bringing racial equity to the forefront. Things like bias, implicit and explicit, microaggressions, those things that happen on an everyday basis that our staff need to understand and know in order to support our students in the way that they need to be supported. We looked even deeper into the elements of the dominant white culture, as well as the pyramid of white supremacy. And we are committed to engaging in conversations, educating, and supporting our leaders and staff on their personal journeys through equity and eventually to anti racism. And as we continued our journey on anti racism, we began to look at specific anti racist training sessions that we embarked on with our leaders this spring. And we will continue to move forward with our school based staff in the fall. Our leaders and our staff will eventually take the intercultural development inventory, which is called the IDI, so that individuals have an understanding of where they are on the intercultural development continuum, from denial, polarization, minimization, and acceptance to adaptation. We are on a journey. We are on a journey as individuals, and we are on a journey as a school division. And we are striving to be on what we call an authentic journey. It is one thing to go on that academic journey where you read books and you do book studies and you have conversations, but it's another thing to be an authentic journey where we also take our learning and our academic knowledge and we use that in what we are doing on an everyday basis, and it guides our thinking. Our lens is always looking through an equity and a racial and anti racism lens. So while we moved through the continuum and we're working and striving to be an anti racist school division, we still believe and have not abandoned the importance of cultural competence and the importance of being culturally responsive in our teaching and how we are engaging our students in the educational process. However, we knew again that we had to grow. We do not want to just be a school division that is competent. We want to see change and we want to dismantle the systemic and institutional racism that is rooted in our educational systems. In order to do that, we had to stand up, we had to face what we call the root cause. So, why racial equity? Why start with what makes people the most uncomfortable? Because it is the root cause. Race is the root cause. It is ingrained in our country's history and woven into the fabric and structures of our institutions. We are being race explicit, but we also want people to know that we are not race exclusive. We do recognize that without the acknowledgement and attention to the root cause, there can be no equity for all in the respects to women, gender identity, social economic status, religious beliefs, or any other area where human beings find marginalization or are being marginalized in our society. Racism shows up in all of our areas and structures and policies and practices, and it contributes directly to the inequities that we see in our school division and in the world around us. We define racial equity as when race does not determine quality of life, opportunities, and outcomes. Our goal is to collectively remove the barriers, as Dr. Hutchins said, that inhibit our students from experiencing the best educational environment possible. And we are deeply committed through the guidance of our strategic plan. What does it mean to be anti-racism? To be an anti-racist? Again, we are on that journey. And the journey, as we said before, can come with obstacles, it can come with setbacks. Sometimes you go back a stage to move up 2 stages, to go back one stage more. But it is a journey, and it's not a linear journey. It can sprout in different directions like a tree leaves and branches, but that journey is still the same. And like equity, it is something that we have never seen or achieved in our lifetime. Racism is a system. It is a system of oppression that is based in and upholds the superiority of white people and the inferiority of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So we acknowledge that there is no such thing as not racist. Often, very often, refers to the passive response to generational trauma and the trauma and pain that was inflicted on Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And we don't want to be a school system that does that. To be not racist is to ignore 400 years of the history that informs the root cause of inequities we see in all aspects of our American life. You are either perpetuating racist ideology, policies, and practices that live in our institutions and systems, or you are actively working against racist ideologies, policies, and practices. And so these couple of bullets kind of signifies where we are as a division and what we strive to be. We strive to support anti-racist policies through our actions. We express anti-racist ideas. We identify racial inequities and disparities and work to dismantle them. And we examine whether our own views and beliefs have justified racial inequalities. And we brought this from, we borrowed some of these from the esteemed Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. So we continue to move on our journey. And in order to move through that, we had to establish clear principles. And these principles guide how we do our work on a daily basis and what we need to do to support our students in the best way, and staff and community in the best way possible. So we definitely want to be data informed. We have to listen to voices and include those voices. We don't just want the voices at the table, we want the voices to be heard, and we want the voices, then that hearing, to be seen in the work that we do. We are equity focused, and we want to ensure that we have an alignment between what our policies say and what our practices are and what we actually are doing within our school division. Alignment such as working, we are in the midst of a huge equity audit of our school board policies to ensure that our alignment works with what our belief system and how we are looking to move forward. And then prioritization, identifying a select number of key performance indicators within our strategic plan with clear measures of implementation. We have to hold ourselves accountable for what we are doing, for what we are seeing, and how we are engaging our staff, our students, and our community as we continue on this anti-racist journey. Thank you, and I will pass it over to Dr. Hutchins, who's going to talk about our identity project.
And thank you, Ms. Wood. We wanted to give you all just kind of like something actually concrete or practical that we have started in this journey. And I just want to preface before I get into our identity project with the fact that this is really only the beginning of our journey of changing the names of a couple of our schools, right? The real work is when we dismantle systemic racism in the brick and mortar of our school buildings and in our offices. Right. So this is only the low hanging fruit. Right. It was a huge endeavor. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't like this is easy. Right. But this is only the beginning. The best is yet to come. And I just have to tell you that we started with a spark of change within our community when we started embarking on the high school project, which we have one high school in the city of Alexandria, one of the largest high schools in the country. It's over 4,000 students, projected to have 5,000 in the next few years. And one thing that we embarked on while we were doing this high school project is we were debating whether to have one high school, to continue to have one high school in the city of Alexandria, or to have two. And it sparked a discussion around when you have more than one high school, and as anybody out there, as you all probably know, because our neighborhoods are segregated in most cities, in most communities, then your high schools also become segregated. And many schools or many cities experience that whole have and have not mentality of schools, right? And we were very adamant and we pushed back a lot. Our community was actually divided on this particular topic because we did not want to perpetuate that kind of systemic racist environment by having the haves and the have-nots, which ends up leading to be black and white, or black and brown and white, or whatever that dynamic may be, because all of our communities are segregated like that. So that is when we begin to spark this conversation around change. We also received a petition in the summer of 2020 where we had some community members who really wanted us to revisit the name of our high school. Everybody knows Remember the Titans, the book, the movie, Remember the Titans, excuse me, it's not the book, but the movie. Denzel Washington, he played Coach Herman Boone, excuse me. And as you all know about the movie, Remember the Titans, Thomas Chambliss Williams, which a lot of people didn't know, was the superintendent of Alexandria City Public Schools for over 30 years. He was also a staunch racist. He believed that white and black students should not learn under the same roof, right? And a part of that, as we did the history of provided education to our community around who Thomas Chambliss Williams was, our community began to understand that why are we going to have the only high school in our community named after this staunch segregationist and racist? Not only that, as we started sharing out some of our history and going through our education of who Thomas Chambliss Williams was, we began to see that not only was the only high school named after Thomas Chambliss Williams, but it was named after him at a time when it was in the late 60s, where they figured black people knew who he was, so they won't go to that school and they won't integrate, right? So there was even a purpose in naming the high school after him, and that came out of some of our research. But we wanted our community to understand that, so we weren't just like saying, let's rip the name off the wall, without people being educated on why we're ripping this name off the wall. And by us going through this very excruciating, I think very informative, I think very eye-opening, provoking, bold, and courageous process, it really didn't have a lot of naysayers and opposition out there. Now, I'm not going to say that we had zero, but it was really a very short leg to stand on if we're preaching and telling you the facts of our history, right? And then asking you, so why will we continue to keep that name there? We also allowed our students to lead, and this is so important because this whole process was a student-led process. Initially, we got the petition from majority white community members in our community who wanted this name changed. We're adamant about having this name changed. But we said, well, hold on for a second. Can we talk to our black and brown students who walk into this building every single day? And let's find out, what does this name make them feel like? Let's allow our black and brown students, and it wasn't just black and brown, because we also, our white students were a part of this process, but we allowed our black and brown students to lead these efforts and to facilitate these conversations and to actually build their capacity and their knowledge around our very racist history here in the city of Alexandria, as well as in Alexandria City Public Schools. And through that process, that is why we were able to have such an efficient and effective project in regards to changing our names of two of our schools. We did a lot of community engagement. We had community reads. We did our citywide conversations. Our elementary class, they actually had like a little family forum. We did a writer of one of the books building the federal schoolhouse. Doug Reed, who's a professor at Georgetown, he did a community session with our community. And we also had public hearings through our school board. But it was a very in-depth but intentional process in order for us to get to the name change. And this is just, a part of our school board approval. And this is one of our school board members, Ms. Heather Thornton. And she said, I know we got those petitions right before summer occurred, and we are all anxious to address it. But looking back, I'm grateful for the thorough engagement process that we had. And, Ms. Thornton, she hit the nail on the head. Everyone wanted us to make a decision right away, tomorrow, right? We needed to make sure that people understood why this decision was being made, and then educating them, because that opened doors to so many other things beyond just these name changes of two of our schools, which we had a unanimous vote from our board, of course, which we are always so thankful for. This is just some background of our renaming process and how we had some of the community engagement in our student poster and essay submissions to help us with these name changes or recommended name changes. And then there were 3 names that actually came before me, and then I made a recommendation to the board. And specifically, what I had recommended to the board was that, and this was based on the community vote. It was not Dr. Hutchings' recommendation, because my person didn't win. I wanted to name it Kamala Harris, right? That didn't happen, but for the high school. But the community, 34.2% of our community voted to name our high school Alexandria High School, and to name our elementary school, which was named after Douglas MacArthur. I'm sorry, not Douglas MacArthur, but Matthew Morey. Excuse me, Matthew Morey, who was also a racist. They recommended to name the elementary school Naomi Brooks. Now, I made these recommendations to the board, but through the process, the board took my recommendation and refined it. And they actually decided that, Alexandria High School is not defining us as a city. So it got changed to Alexandria City High School. So that is what the board approved for the name, for the renaming of T.C. Williams. So now Alexandria City High School, which we officially are Alexandria City High School now. I'm so excited because by the way, I'm a graduate of T.C. Williams High School. So I'm also an alumni of TC's, but I'm happy to say now Alexandria City, or AC High School. And then the refinement that the board made to Naomi Brooks Elementary School was Naomi Brooks' husband, who is General Brooks. He said that his wife, she went by the name of Naomi L. Brooks. So we wanted to make sure that we were honoring her name that she uses and the way she uses it, as well as honoring her husband's wishes. So the board approved for Naomi Brooks to be Naomi L. Brooks Elementary School, and that was due to the votes. So it was a very intense process. If I could do it all over again, I tell you what, I would do it exactly the same way. We had great media coverage. We had our students feeling empowered. We had our last class of T.C. Williams, the class of 2021, who just graduated, which we were really excited about. And next year, we're going to have our first class of Alexandria City High School. So this process was amazing, and we're just looking forward to what else comes our way. Because like I said, this was our low-hanging fruit. This was not the end-all, be-all, because we got so much more to do. So this concludes our portion of our presentation to you all. We wanted to make sure that we afforded time for any of our participants today to ask us questions. I'm going to ask for Ms. Burgos, who is our Chief of School and Community Relations, to join us at this time so that we can answer any questions that you all may have about our strategic plan, about our journey to becoming an anti-racist school division, or even about the Identity Project, which was one of our first major initiatives in this journey of being anti-racist. So let them come on in. I think you all can put them into the Q&A, or you can put them into the chat section, I believe, and then I will be able to read them off, and one of us will be able to answer any of those questions. So I see one question here. It says, let me publish it. So it says, I've seen research and have experienced organizational attempts to improve racial equity, to solve an issue. Let me go back up. To solve an issue such as disproportionate discipline for African American students, where solutions typically bring other minoritized group issues to the table. And when it's done, all groups benefit except the original issue of the disproportionate discipline. How does your team avoid interest conversion to solve issues such as these without interference? One, that's a great question. And this is why, sometimes I think a lot of times people go wrong because you just want to jump to solutions and you're not really understanding what's leading. And I'm going to use discipline because you put that into this question. You really have to go and investigate what's leading to some of the discipline kind of referrals. And that is something that we have already begun to embark on. Why are staff sending referrals to the office? And what are the referrals for, right? And when you begin to disaggregate that data and determine who's sending the referrals, is it the same teachers, and what race are they? Are they sending kids out for some of the same reasons? I mean, we're going that deep instead of putting it on the kid. And I think a lot of times people put some of these disciplinary actions, and not to get me wrong, there are what we call ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, that may manifest into certain behaviors in classrooms, right, for certain kids. That doesn't mean that our reaction has to always be suspension or expulsion. That child needs some form of social or emotional support, not to be kicked out of school and to go back home into an environment that may be triggering some of the behaviors that are manifesting in the classroom. But to answer your question, because I was about to go on a tangent, is that we make sure that we do more of a deeper dive as to why these disciplinary referrals are even making it to the office, who are sending them, and we work from there versus just the student. But Ms. Wood, you may want to contribute to that because you work with our alternative programs as well.
Yeah. And I wanted to add to that, Dr. Hutchings, that is one of the reasons why it's so very important to talk about cultural competency, and also to talk about the different vocabulary that go along with equity, like identifying bias, explicit and implicit bias, identifying what microaggressions are and how they impact the students and the staff that are around us. So, coupled with our equity work and training, again, that helps our staff to really start to dig deeper into how they see the kids that are in front of them. And a lot of times it's not intentional, it is not something that they are trying to do. However, if you don't understand and recognize when that happens, then you can't change it. And so our equity trainings and our racial equity trainings, coupled with looking at the data and really digging deep, helps us to move along in that way.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wood. I also see, talk about how we maintained momentum even with leadership and with school board turnover. And that's a great question. I can start with that, and then Ms. Wood can finish with this. We have been fortunate to have a board that, and I came in as superintendent 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago now, and the new board that came on, most of their platform was to really tackle inequities. So they came on wanting to do equity work, which was a huge benefit for us in ACPS. Fast forward to today, 6 of our 9 board members are now going off the board and not running for re-election, unfortunately, right? Because we had the momentum going, right? And so we know there's going to be somewhat of a hiccup. However, what keeps the momentum going with our leadership is that we have a strategic plan that outlines our efforts. And that is going to be so key. It is not tied to a board member. It is not tied to the superintendent. It is not tied to a principal, because all of those people in those roles come and go. When you have a 5-year strategic plan that courageously and boldly identifies what you are going to achieve over the next 5 years, it is difficult to go off that path. As I said earlier, your strategic plan really is your marching orders and your path to success. So that was one of the ways that we've been able to do that. Another piece is things like this. We talk about our journey on anti-racism quite often. We try to do presentations. We make sure it is a part of our board updates and everything that we do. We also just recently, the board just renewed my contract for 4 more years, and our board members we're on an anti-racist journey T-shirts at the board meeting, as well as all of our leaders, right? And it was very powerful. We got some negative comments about that, right? So we got emails on people wanted to FOIA who bought the T-shirts and why are they wearing it? Are we trying to divide Alexandria, right? I mean, so everybody's not happy about this work, but we are continuing to be relentless in spite of the naysayers that are out there to get this work done. I was hired to tackle our inequities in Alexandria City Public Schools. That was one of my questions during my interview. And one thing that I said in my response was that I cannot do that alone. It is going to require everyone around me to have the same boldness and courage to do this work. And when people start fighting and getting upset and angry, which I already get threats, unfortunately, and I already get very nasty emails and tweets and all kinds of crazy stuff. People who are, want me fired as the superintendent. But in spite of all of those things, I still wake up every day knowing this is my mission. And guess what? I'm going to bring it. As long as I'm the superintendent, I'm going to bring it every single day into this building, and we're going to be relentless about it and unapologetic. Ms. Wood, I don't know if you want to add something to that.
Just one thing, Dr. Hutchins, is that part of our training, and I'll just keep going back to, like, we are working really hard to ensure that we are creating spaces to have these conversations. The training also includes training that we've done with our school board members over the past couple of years on this journey, as well as monthly training with our division leaders. And that monthly training turns into turnaround training for their staff. So we have to make sure that we are creating these spaces and making room, and not just making room, but um, being intentional about the space and the room that we are creating for our leaders and our division staff to have these conversations. And so when you start to get new staff and you start to get new leaders, they're coming into a system that this is what we do. This is who we are. And so if you come into our school division, then you know that from the beginning and you make a choice of whether this is the best place for you or not. So as we continue to have, different leaders come in, and hopefully Dr. Hutchins will do more than 4 more years. We'll talk about that later. But, this is who we are, and this is who we're saying we are as a school division. And like Dr. Hutchins said, we are guided by our strategic plan. So it does not have ownership with any one person within our division.
Thank you. And that ties right into how we garner the community support. When we did our strategic planning work, that was really how we garnered the community support, by bringing all those different groups to the table and them being able to really digest some of the challenges that we have and able to articulate some of that data that was there. And then they were able to go back into their communities. And that's why it was important to have diverse communities to front load like why we need to go on this anti-racist journey. So it really started from the time we began planning or the planning phase of our strategic plan, and we just continue to build on that each year. We had to pivot too because we had a pandemic, but in spite of the pandemic, we were still bringing in, how there were inequities with the pandemic and kids who had internet and kids who didn't. We made sure we were still tackling those systemic racial issues that we had. So it says, with residential segregation, does it help to have a diverse school board? And how can you suggest that the lack of diversity on school boards can prohibit racial equity? I think that it is important to have diverse school boards. I am an advocate for that. I think it is important for school boards to mirror the student demographics as well. I truly believe that. I think that is how you get real change. But we also know that doesn't always occur. So I do believe that you can have a very homogenous school board and still have, racial equity at the heart of the work that you do. but that is going to require the appropriate training, and it's going to require them individually wanting to build capacity in regards to equity, in regards to being an anti-racist. Because sometimes people want that kind of like that solution, like just give me the answer type thing. And when you're going on an anti-racist journey, this requires a lot of self-reflection and independent work too. You're going to have to build your own professional and personal capacity so that you can start grappling with your own microaggressions and biases and racist tendencies that everybody has for different reasons. So you're going to have to be able to tackle that. So that is some of the things or recommendations that I have in regards to, brought in the board. I want to give this question to the next question to Kennetra. It's about some states, including Texas, are facing state legislative challenges to explicitly addressing race, racism, and racial history in K-12, quote unquote, critical race theory. I think that's what we were talking about. This is an attack on this type of intentional, in-depth anti-racist work. What do you recommend to other school districts who face heightened state pressure to avoid these critical conversations?
So there have been a lot of conversations around this, and I've had personally a couple of conversations with community members who had questions around just that. The first thing I would say is that we are here to educate our students and to create a society of critical thinkers. If we are doing that, then we have to put all information on the table for students to be able to make critical decisions. And that has been my conversation as I've been talking to some of the naysayers or some people who really have questions around this. I would say the second thing is that if the state itself is moving in that direction, then what is it that you hold dear, and how are you as a school division, where do you really want to stand? And so one thing that we've done in Northern Virginia is we've started to meet as equity leaders of Northern Virginia and decided that we wanted to come together and tackle this issue as a team. So it's not just our one school division, Alexandria City Public Schools, who is standing on, bringing the truth into our classrooms. We also are a state where the VDOE is doing the same thing within our curriculum. And so critical race theory, as Dr. said, quote unquote, has been thrown out there here and there. But that's not the core of the issue. The core of the issue is that we are educating our students in a way that they are informed citizens and that they are able to make informed and critical decisions about how they want to see, view, and live in the world that we're in today. And so, banding together as divisions who have the same interests, the same goals, and want the same things for their students helps support those things within the state. Now, again, there's always going to be that comment, there's always going to be that fight, but continuing to move forward and standing strong in what you believe in is the only way that we can see that it can be done. um, James Baldwin says, and this is a loose quote of what he said, but you may not change everything that you face, but if you don't face it, then there will be no change to it at all. And so we really have to hold strong in what our beliefs are and how we move forward. I will also add, I just read an article about a counselor in Georgia who decided that she was going to resign from her school division because the school board there banned the teaching of critical race theory and racial and equitable practices within their school system. And so it became an article because, again, if you don't stand for what you believe in, then you're going to fall for anything. And so this particular counselor decided that that was not a school division that she could work in. And so as we move forward, we just have to really be able to hold strong in what we believe in and garner the support around us so that we are stronger as a unit as opposed to having to be a standalone. Dr. Hutchins?
Amen to that. I have nothing further to say other than thank you for that. And I tell you, we got to be that bold in saying whether or not a place is right for us to work. We talk about this critical race theory component, and we're right now kind of like trying to get our messaging and our stance in regards to the critical race theory, together in Alexandria City Public Schools. But I will say this: our job as educators is to teach history. Period. And we're supposed to teach the right history and the real history. And also, we are supposed to make connections to how things are today. And that really is what the critical race theory is all about. It's understanding your past, the raw, the real, the ugly, the good, the bad, right? And tying it to how it impacts how things operate today and what things look like today in regards to the racial tension and the oppression and all those other things, whether it's segregated communities or gentrification in community, all of that ties to our history. If you don't know our history, it's always going to feel disconnected. And that is why a lot of people don't want us to speak truth. But I tell you what, the truth will set you free. So I'm gonna move on. Someone had asked about can we talk a little bit about some of the audits, and I think this is an important piece. And I know we're coming towards an end, but Miss Wood, if you can talk to our audit, because I think this is a key point. We're working actually with IDRA, and they are working with us to conduct an equity audit of our policies. And policy drives practice. But if you can share a little bit about that, I think it would be helpful to all of our participants today, and then we're going to conclude.
Absolutely. So we embarked on our audit around the winter of 2020. So we went in front of the board and gained our approval to move forward, which, might I add, it was a board initiative to audit our school board policies with an equity lens. And so we created a team to review our policies. So IDRA supports us and helps us to go through this process, but our team consists of myself and our chief of student services and equity, as well as our cultural competence coordinator, two of our school board members, and then we also brought in an equity resident to help support with that work as well. And we are going through an in-depth process. We've had audits in the past of our policies from different groups where they come in, they look at our stuff, they give us a report, and then we're supposed to run with it, right, and make those changes. But this time, we are actually engaged in the actual work of reading, reviewing, and making recommendations of each of our policies from an equity lens. And so we started with the policies that are closely most directly related to students. So our student policies, our instructional policies, and our foundational policies. Um, and with that process, it is a very long and time consuming and tedious process, but rewarding in that we are the ones that have to own it. And even though IDRA is working with us and supporting us and giving us their lens and their ideas and walking us through this process, we eventually are going to have to maintain and continue this work as we move forward. And those of us who are here now are not here. So we have to continue that process. And so we are in the revision stage, getting ready to move into the revision stage and looking at our second tier of policies as we move forward. In addition to auditing our school board policies, we also do equity audits of our staff, students, and families. So we did our first one I want to say several years ago. The pandemic keeps us from the years, but in 2018, 2019, spring of 2019, we did our first equity audit to engage our students and our staff in that process to see where we were and get our baseline data. We have now evolved where we have a survey, equity survey coming out of our strategic plan work where we are holding ourselves accountable and continuing to look at where we are as a school division. So that alignment that Dr. Hutchins spoke about that is critical to our strategic plan helps us and guides us to move this work forward and look at every aspect of our school division as we continue on our journey to be anti-racist.
Drop the mic. That's all I got to say, right? So let me just tell you all, thank you for your time. We are passionate about this work. Things that we talk about, and I say everybody in Alexandria City Public Schools are VIPs. And I don't mean very important people. They're people with vision, integrity, and passion. And this journey on becoming an anti-racist school system, it is the epitome of vision, integrity, and passion. And we're going to keep doing it courageously, boldly, and unapologetically. Watch us, right? Because guess what? We are coming through no matter whether you open the door or not. We will knock the door down. We are coming through because the time is now, period. you all have to also step up to the plate and do it too. We can't do this alone. And regardless of what color you are, you can make a difference for this next generation. Education is truly the key to changing the narrative for our future. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you for giving us this platform to speak our truth. And we wish you all well in your journey to becoming an anti-racist school system. Have a great day.
Have a great day. Thank you.